Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Let's give a warm welcome to Maxine Ohliger.
Hi, my name is Max, and I'm a happy member of Al-Anon. It wasn't always like that. When I first came to Al-Anon and I heard people talking about they were happy and grateful, I wanted to vomit. I just couldn't imagine how anybody could be grateful to have their husband be an alcoholic, although I really didn't believe that Paul was an alcoholic. So I didn't find any or look for any answers during the drinking, because I drank too. I drank with Paul for years, drink for drink. And he often says that we tried to outdrink one another and he won by an allergy. Anyway, what I thought was that Paul was crazy. And so my solution was to try to find him a psychiatrist. I hope there are no psychiatrists here, because I usually disturb them. Because I really didn't get any help from psychiatrists. Anyway, I decided that Paul needed a psychiatrist, but he wouldn't go. So I went. I thought that if I went, I could maneuver him into going. And he never would go, and I ended up going 3.5 years. I never learned anything about myself. I would go in, and I went to 4 different ones, and they were the kind who just sat. And somebody had to talk, because I thought of all this money it was costing me. So I talked. And I told them what Paul was doing, and I told them what my older daughter was doing. And each week I'd go back and give them a new story. And, they never made any comments, except the first one. Everything I said, he laughed. And I didn't like him, because I didn't think the things I was telling him were funny. And anyway, after I went to him for about 6 months, Paul decided that I was such a mess that he was going to take me over to Westwood and have me hypnotized. And when I told the psychiatrist this, he said, if you do that, don't come back. And I was glad, because that was my out and I didn't have to go to him anymore. Anyway, Paul had tried to hypnotize me one time. He had taken some courses in hypnosis. We used to go to Las Vegas, and I would sit in on the sessions, and they were really kind of interesting. So when he tried, he decided I should relax, and he gave me a Milltown, and I laid on the couch and went to sleep. And so he wouldn't do it anymore, but he thought this other fella could do it. I really don't think I was ever hypnotized, because after 6 sessions, this fellow decided I should see someone in Anaheim, because that's where we lived at the time. Also, the first fellow had me tested. He gave me the Minnesota multiphasic test, which is about 600 questions. And I had the feeling I was being tricked, because they would ask a question, and then about 10 down would be the same question, only worded a little differently. So I was very careful when I took that. And then he gave me the Rorschach test. And somehow or other, I had heard that this had something to do with sex. So I was particularly careful with that one. And I only saw animals. After we came on the program, there was an alcoholic woman who had done the same thing. And when he gave me my results, he told me I was very rigid and would never change. And I was horrified. Here I was the only one doing anything about this mess, and this professional saying you might as well give up because nothing's going to change. Anyway, I also went to priests, but I didn't go to the parish priest. I would go to a priest I didn't know. And I heard about this priest over, to the chaplain over at St. Joseph's Hospital in Orange. So I called and made an appointment with him. And I must have gone and talked to him for about, 2-3 hours. I don't remember. It was a long time. And he said what he usually did is he would talk to the wife alone, and then he would talk to the husband alone, and then he would talk to the two of us together. So when I went home, I had not told Paul where I had gone, and so he wanted to know where I'd been. And I said he wants to see you. And he reluctantly agreed he would go. So I got on the phone and made the appointment for the next day. And he went over and was gone forever. And when he came back, he was furious. And I asked him if we were going to go see him together, and he said, no, I'm not going back. So the next day I called the priest, and I said, what happened? And he said, your husband is the most stubborn man I've ever seen. And that was the whole explanation. We found out after we were on the program that this priest was also an alcoholic, drinking at the time, so no wonder they didn't get along. I made a married couples retreat, and I went alone. And no one thought this was strange. You know, my husband was a doctor, and he couldn't get away. But I really went to talk to the priest. And I spent several hours with him, and he came to the same conclusion that I did, that Paul needed psychiatric care, but I didn't know how to get him there. I did get Paul, the last one I went to, I did get Paul to go, because after I'd gone to him a while, he wanted to see Paul, so Paul agreed he would go. And we went into Long Beach, and Paul went in with the psychiatrist and stayed about 5 minutes and came out and said, I have nothing to say to him, and that was the end of that. But after we had been on the program, 5-6 years, Dr. Persh, who was in charge of the Navy program at that time, had asked Paul to be on a panel. And it was a dinner meeting, and we just assumed it was something for the Navy, so I didn't go. And when Paul came home, he was all excited because he and 4 or 5 Navy doctors had talked to the Long Beach Medical Association. And he said he noticed this one fellow sitting on the edge of his chair and nodding and smiling, and he thought, gee, this guy must really be interested in alcoholism. And afterwards he came running up to Paul and said, remember me? And Paul looked at his badge and said, were you at the VA hospital? He said, no, I was one of your wife's psychiatrists. And that was the fellow that I had gotten Paul to go see. He was delighted to see him and acted like he knew all along what the problem was. But I don't think so, because after we got on the program, Paul wrote letters and literature to all my psychiatrists and told them that he was on AA and I was on Al-Anon, and if they'd like to talk to us, we'd be glad to talk to them. We never heard from any of them. So I really don't believe that he knew, because none of them ever asked me if my husband drank. I don't know what they thought. I guess they thought he was crazy too, just like I did. Anyway, we had no communication, and usually it seemed like if I were in the bedroom, Paul would be in the living room, or vice versa. We didn't spend any time together, and I don't think we did anything socially maybe for the last 3 years, because Paul had refused to go to any of the parties. He would say, I don't want to drink, and I thought, that's stupid. When we'd go to a party, he wouldn't drink. I couldn't understand this. I was very confused about the whole thing. Anyway, one Sunday morning, I was showing Paul some rust spots on the floor in the family room, and he was looking at them, and all of a sudden he was on the floor having a convulsion. And I got very excited because I'd never seen anyone have a convulsion before. And I called the doctor on the next block, and it seemed like it took forever for him to come. And finally he got there, and by that time Paul had awakened, and Art decided that Paul should go in the hospital. So I rode in the ambulance with him, and when we got there, Paul would not stay overnight unless I stayed. So I stayed overnight, and the next day he felt fine and wanted to come home. Pardon me. And he saw a neurologist while he was in there, and this neurologist wanted him to come in the office the following Wednesday and have some tests, and I had to drive him over, so we went over to see this doctor, and we got into his consultation room, and Paul proceeded to tell him that the only problem was it was a marital problem. Now, I couldn't understand how I could cause him to have a convulsion, but if he said so, it had to be true. I believed everything he said. You know, I thought he was crazy, but if he said something, it was gospel truth. I've learned on Al-Anon that ain't necessarily so. Anyway, he refused to have any of the tests, and we went back to living the way we had been. And everything that would happen, I would call this neurologist because we didn't know him socially. So I felt safe, and there were a lot of weird things going on. Several doctors in our building had talked to me about Paul's change of personality, and I agreed, but I wouldn't say any more. And I thought if I talked to what was going on about in our family, Paul would kill me. But anyway, I would call this neurologist. And he told me that Paul either had a brain tumor or early senility or something else, I don't remember. And Paul told me he had a brain tumor. So I was focused in on that. And I knew that he was taking pills because I heard him get up at night and take pills. So that I was focused in on that. And the drinking, like I say, I drank with him. I didn't see anything wrong with that. But after I got on the program, I can see there were certain things I did that I didn't want Paul to drink. For instance, he had a doctor in his family as patients, and every year this doctor would give Paul a case of scotch. Now, Paul would drink maybe a couple bottles, and the rest I would hide. I would put him in my dresser drawers and in the closets and any place I could find a place. And then periodically I'd go back and count them, and then I couldn't remember how many I'd put there in the first place. And one time I had an extra bottle, and I had no place at home for it, so I decided to take it down to the office. And we had a L-shaped desk, and underneath this one corner was a cupboard, and we never used it, so I thought that's a good place to put it. So I stuck this bottle in there, and it clinked up against another bottle, and I reached in and got an empty half pint of scotch. And I thought, those stupid cleaning people. It never occurred to me that Paul had put it there. But the dumbest part of all is I left my full quart. Thank you. Also, after we got on the program, when I got enough courage to look at all these bottles that I'd hidden, Paul had found every one. Every one. I think he thought he had a bonanza. The other thing game we would play is Paul would get up in the morning and decide he was going to quit drinking, and he was going to change all our friends. And I thought, this is just one of his kooky ideas, because I couldn't imagine how we could change all our friends. So I would help him pour out the beer, and I'd think, this is a waste, because I liked beer, and I'd decide I wasn't going to get as much anymore. So then that night, he would decide that he wanted some beer, and he and I'd have a little argument about me going to the store, getting him 3 beers. So I would go, and I'd feel silly, taking the 3 cans out of the 6-pack, but I'd do it. And I'd come home and think, well, I'll have one. And he didn't want me to have one. And I couldn't understand when I was good enough to go get it that I couldn't have one. I guess I could have gotten 4. That never occurred to me, but knowing what I know now, if I'd gotten 4, he would have wanted 4. And then another game we used to play, we had built our house in Anaheim, and we had a walk-up bar with folding doors. And periodically, Paul would decide he's going to quit drinking, and he would lock the bar and give me the key, so we could fight over it every night. And every night, he would tell me, he had to have this one drink. He just needed one drink because he had trouble sleeping. And so I would open the bar, and we'd each have a drink, and then I would go to bed, and then Paul would try to get this open, and he could tell you that. That's his story. But I would hide the key in different places, and anyway, we played all kinds of games like that. I still don't understand why I couldn't see that maybe this was a problem. But that's the way it was. I guess the denial in me was very strong. Also, I grew up in a home where there was alcoholism. And Paul didn't fit that picture of what I thought an alcoholic was. I had 2 uncles who were alcoholic, and I knew they had a problem. But I didn't know it with Paul, or else I wasn't willing to look at that. I don't know. Anyway, we after he had this convulsion, like I say, then nothing happened. And then 14 months later, I was in the living room one Saturday night, and Paul was back in the bedroom, and I heard this noise, and I walked back, and there's Paul on the floor having a convulsion. So I sat down on the edge of the bed, and I watched him. And when he finished, I said, "You've had a convulsion. You better go to bed." And I hadn't even been to Al-Anon yet. So the next day, I called the neurologist, and he decided that Paul should go back to the Mayo Clinic. And it took a month for him to get an appointment. And during that month, Paul was going, and he wasn't going, and he was going. I was kind of frantic because I felt this was my last chance to get him medical help. But anyway, at the last minute, he decided he would go. And so that was in December of 1966. So Paul and I and our 2 kids went back to Rochester, Minnesota, and Paul started through the Mayo Clinic. And I made up my mind I was going to get in and see that neurosurgeon and tell him about the pills that Paul was taking. Now, I didn't know what he was taking, but I knew he'd get up at night and take things. So I think we were there about 4 days before I really got courage enough to go over there. And they had this huge waiting room, probably as big as this room. And everybody that was in there was a patient, and when you were a patient, you had a number. Well, I wasn't a patient, and I didn't have a number, and I don't know what I told that gal, but she let me in. And I told the neurosurgeon about this, and when Paul went back the next day to get his results, this neurosurgeon decided that Paul should see a psychiatrist, and then he ended up in the nut ward. And that was a strange thing, too, because it was so important to me that I get in to see him. And after I did it, I did not remember for 6 years that I had done that. And then when I remembered, I didn't tell Paul for another year because I wasn't sure how he was going to take this. I think he often wondered what happened. But anyway, this was the day before Christmas, and I went over to see him, and he wanted out. And he wanted me to take the responsibility for him, and I didn't know whether I should do this or not, but he told me that if I didn't agree, he'd never speak to me again. So what could I do? I really didn't know what a God opportunity that was, but anyway, he said he wouldn't drink and he wouldn't take pills, and I don't know what else he promised me, and so I agreed. And the next day we got on the plane and had a big fight over whether or not he was going to drink the free booze. I won. He didn't drink, but he wouldn't talk or eat either, all the way back to California. And when he got back, he got himself a bottle and drank it. And still, I couldn't see that that was the problem. Anyway, the next morning, I was up at 4 o'clock. I was frantic, and I was calling everybody I could think of. I called my brother-in-law back in Ohio, and he said, well, he has to have medical help. And anyway, finally it was 9 o'clock, and I could call the neurologist and tell him what happened. And when I called him, he asked me whether Paul would see a local psychiatrist. And I said, I don't know, because it hadn't worked before. But anyway, when Paul got up, he agreed he would go. And we went over to see this psychiatrist in Santa Ana, and he talked to Paul for about 45 minutes and talked to me for about 10 minutes and locked him up in the local nut ward. And I knew he was in the right place. And so anyway, I had an hour. I could go see him every day. And Paul spent his time locked up in the nut ward making lists of things for me to do to keep the world running while he was locked up in the nut ward. And every day I would go pick up my list. And after he'd give me the list, he'd say, why don't you go home? I guess he wanted me to get started, but I had an hour, so I sat. We didn't talk, but I sat there. And I can't remember exactly how long it was before this psychiatrist had some fellow from AA picking Paul up and taking him to AA meetings, and I really didn't know why he was going to AA. And one time on the list, he had me go over to the central office and pick up the big book, and I really didn't know why I was supposed to do that either, but it was on the list, so I did it. Anyway, and I'm a little hazy about this time, too. I can't remember how long it was before one Saturday night I went over to see Paul, and this AA fellow came in, And Paul introduced us, and Frank said, we're going to an AA meeting. Would you like to go along? I didn't have anything else to do, so I said, okay. And we got in the car with this guy, and he was telling us all kinds of personal things. And I thought, my God, you don't talk to strangers like this. You don't tell them all these things. He was talking about how he and his wife had broken up, and then he was trying to get back together with her, and he gave her guitar lessons for Christmas, and then she ran off with a guitar teacher. And what kind of a business is this? Anyway, he took us to Laguna Beach. And we got down there, and it was a large meeting, a couple hundred people. And I was scared to death we'd see somebody we knew. And I looked all around the room, and I didn't see anybody I knew. And then they turned the lights out, and they only had candles, and then I could be comfortable. But Paul and I got together down there and decided we weren't going with him anymore. He was a kook. Anyway, I don't remember anything that was said in that meeting, but there was a feeling in the room. I called it enthusiasm and positive thinking, and I really enjoyed the meeting. I had never heard people talk that way like they did on AA, where they expressed how they were really feeling. In fact, that's the way I got in touch with a lot of my feelings, because I had completely turned them off. If you don't feel, you don't get hurt. And I don't know how long before that, but I didn't really feel anything at all. I was just numb for a long, long time. And it took me a long time on the program to even come in touch with what I was feeling. But anyway, so I enjoyed the meeting. And then Frank had this Al-Anon gal call me, and she must have called me the next day. I don't remember that either. But I didn't like her at all. She would call me up a dozen times a day, talking about Al-Anon, whatever that was, and she kept telling me I shouldn't work for Paul. Well, I had worked in the office for Paul since he started in practice, and I didn't want to quit. That was my security. I didn't get paid, but, that was my security. And so after I went to 3 meetings with her, and that took all day, and I thought, I can't spend all day on a Monday going to an Al-Anon meeting. I had to be at her house at 10 o'clock in the morning. I didn't get home till 4 o'clock. Monday was a busy day in the office. I just, I couldn't afford. Besides, I didn't like women's clubs, and I had a thing about wasting my time. I didn't want to waste my time, and things were better, So why should I bother with this Al-Anon, whatever it was? And then that was the final straw when she decided I shouldn't work for Paul. And so I thought, if that's Al-Anon, I want no part of it, and I quit Al-Anon. But I continued to go to the AA meetings and really enjoyed them. And in fact, Paul and I would sometimes have an argument, and then he would decide to punish me and not go to AA. And I would get dressed and go down to Laguna Beach. At that time, I was afraid to drive on the freeway. I was really frightened to go down there because we couldn't figure out the schedule. We thought that the only meetings were in Laguna Beach. But we'd look at that schedule and just couldn't figure it out at all. Anyway, I think I did this maybe 3 or 4 times, and then Paul decided to come back with me to the meetings. But I didn't go to Al-Anon then for 10 months. And they had a Southern California convention in Anaheim, and it was about 5 minutes away from where we lived. So on Saturday afternoon, I went over to the Al-Anon meeting, and Paul didn't go. I don't know if he had to go to the hospital or what, but he didn't go. And that was unlike me, too, because I usually didn't do things on my own. And I sat in the back of the room, and one of the gals who had come to those meetings when I went to Laguna Beach came in and said, why don't you sit with us? And I was very grateful to Martha, because I certainly didn't feel a part of. Even when we went to the AA meetings, Paul and I, if we got down to Laguna too early, we'd go have a soda or something. We didn't want to get in there too early. And we'd sit by the door, and as soon as they said the Lord's Prayer, we were out the door, and on the way home would complain that no one was friendly. I don't think they knew we existed for the first year. I don't ever remember Paul raising his hand as a newcomer. We just didn't want to talk to those people. Anyway, I went and sat with Martha and some of the other gals, and I think for the first time I heard something. They talked about release with love, and there were 4 women who talked, and I decided that maybe I'd give Al-Anon another try. But I thought Laguna was too far, so I went to meetings closer to home, and I went 6 Monday nights, and I really didn't get much out of those meetings. This one woman used to come every week and talk about her ex-husband was living around the corner from her with another woman, and I didn't identify with that. And as sick as I was, I knew that that was not helping me. And I guess I'd heard enough in the Laguna meeting to go back there. And that was a large meeting. And when I finally decided to go back, there must have been 70 or 80 people there. And I'd listened to these women, and I thought, my God, it was like they were speaking a foreign language. I didn't know what they were talking about. And there were at least a dozen women in that group that had been on Al-Anon a long, long time. And I would go in and try to find a table where they wouldn't notice me, and that was always the table they started at. And I finally decided that I would say, my name is Maxine and I pass. And then I could be comfortable, because before I was worried about what I was going to say, and I didn't know anything. And Paul had always told me I was stupid, and I didn't want everybody else to know that. So anyway, I did that for a year, and I think those women thought I was never going to talk. I didn't plan on it either, really. And if anybody had told me that I would get up at a podium and talk when I was new, you wouldn't have seen me for dust, believe me. No way was I going to talk. Anyway, I started going back to the meetings, and I made a commitment that I was going to go no matter what, because I could always find a reason why I couldn't go because of the office. And like I said, it was busy on Monday, and it was inconvenient for me to walk out on a Monday morning. But I did it, and I went every Monday. And the only indication I had that things were better was that I felt better when I went than when I didn't go. And so I continued to go, and actually I was learning something too. So anyway, I think, I don't know how long I'd been around, and I was finally able to release my daughter. And I was so anxious to go down and tell them that I finally knew what they were talking about, and they didn't call on me. But anyway, I went long enough until I got comfortable, and I went to that meeting 12 years. And I really learned a lot. I am very grateful to that program. I have trouble. Dale said we're going to move again. We lived in one house 21 years in Anaheim, and I thought we were going to stay there forever. And with this move, in the last 5 years, we'll have moved 4 times. And each time was a new Al-Anon meeting for me. And, you know, it's strange because I found myself feeling the same way as I did when I was new. I didn't want to talk. I wanted to disappear into the wall. I didn't think I knew anything. And it kind of surprised me that that happened after I'd had all that time on Al-Anon. So I guess I never will have it made. You know, I'll have to come back forever. But anyway, when we moved up to Claremont, I tried different meetings and didn't like them, so I started my own. And it's turned into a good meeting, really. I really enjoy it. It's a Monday morning meeting, and it's turned into a good meeting. I'm sure that I don't have that much to do with it. It's the gals who come. But we have a nucleus that come every week. I am very grateful for Al-Anon because it really has changed my perspective. The things that were important to me before the program are no longer important. I find that my peace of mind and serenity are much more important than anything else that I can get. And I've had a taste of feeling good, and I like that. I know when I first came in, I used to worry about whether or not Paul would drink again. But, you know, I think I was in Al-Anon maybe a year before I was even convinced that Paul was an alcoholic. And I certainly didn't think it was a disease. I have the freedom to be me, which I never felt I had before. I used to try to be the person that Paul told me he wanted me to be, and I never did it right. Never did it right, no matter how hard I tried. And with being a doctor's wife, I didn't know how a doctor's wife was supposed to act. I still don't know. But that's okay now. I think I accept me now, and if other people don't like me, then I guess that's their problem. There's a black speaker, I don't know if he talks anymore or not, but he used to say if people didn't like him, he just felt they were losing the chance to meet a real nice fella. And Al-Anon has helped me in all areas of my life, not only with dealing with the alcoholic, but it sure has helped me with my kids. And there have been things that have happened in sobriety that have nothing to do with alcoholism that I could not have handled if I hadn't had Al-Anon. I've had several experiences. I've had several surgeries. Maybe Maribel identifies with this. Before we moved up here, I had to have some surgery, and I was in St. Joseph's Hospital in Orange, and this pastoral nun came in the night before, and she said, "You're going to have surgery tomorrow." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "You're scared, aren't you?" I said, "No." She said, "Of course you are." And I just thought to myself, "Well, lady, you don't have a program." And then when we moved to Claremont, Paul said he had a bad back, so he couldn't help me with the moving. And so I had all the work to do, and I was lifting all these heavy boxes. And I had this film in front of my one eye, and I kept thinking, well, it'll go away. Well, after 6 weeks, I decided maybe I should do something about this. And when I went to the doctor, I found out I had detached retina, and I had to have surgery right away. So he took me back to Orange County because we knew the doctors there, and the doctor told me that he didn't know whether I'd have sight in that eye, and if I did, I'd probably have double vision. And I laid there that night before with my eyes bandaged, and I thought, I could have been mad at Paul because he didn't pick it up, or I could have been mad at myself because I hadn't done something about it. But, that's pretty typical of doctors' families. You don't get medical care. Anyway, I decided there wasn't anything I could do about this. It was a reality, and I couldn't change it. So I might as well accept it. And I did, and I was comfortable. And the next day I had the surgery, and, I lost a little vision, but I still can see out of that eye, and I never did have double vision. And, gee, that was a much more comfortable way to go through that surgery than the way I would have been before. And I'm grateful for the program because I know that I couldn't have handled things like that before. And I'll tell you briefly about my one daughter. I've always had problems with my older daughter. When she was 18, she left home, and she went to live with another gal. She had a part-time job, and she had a little money, and she was going to school. Well, 3 months, that was all gone. And the girl she was living with wanted her out, and so Paul and I and the other daughter had a little conference, and we decided we didn't want Ann back because she caused so much commotion in our family, and it had been nice and peaceful from the time she left. So I found her place down in L.A., and we paid her room and board. And we never could get her to get a job. I mean, she would go out in the car, and she'd come back, and she wouldn't have a job. But anyway, these nuns, they made her get a job, and she got a job, I think, at the Hilton down in L.A., and so we went for vacation. We didn't see Ann. I mean, she just wouldn't contact us. I don't know how many months she was down there. And so we went on vacation. We came back, called, and the nun said, well, Ann moved out yesterday. And Paul said, do you think we should try to find her? And I said, no, she'll probably contact us, which she did the next day. She and her boyfriend were driving a rented car, and she had run up a $140 motel bill, and she wanted us to give her that money. And Paul told her he could only share his experience, strength, and hope with her. And he had never had this problem. And she'd have to figure it out for herself. That was Saturday, and Monday she called me at the office and she said, Daddy doesn't understand. They're going to put me in jail. And I said, oh, okay, we'll see you around. And she said, what in the hell's going on here? Because she had always gotten a reaction out of me. She'd say one word and I was on the ceiling. I don't think she cared much for the program because it changed us. Anyway, we didn't give her the money, and she had to sign a note. And she wrote us this letter about how all these wonderful things she was going to do, and she wasn't going to be money grubbing like some people she knew. And eventually she got over it. We had something that just happened just about a month ago, though. She and her husband, she married this fellow that she was going with, and she and her husband wanted to buy a house, and she called and wanted to know if she could have $10,000. And I said no, and I didn't even feel guilty. But anyway, she's done crazy things that I've never heard of anybody else doing. For instance, after they were married, she and her husband and some of her other friends decided that they didn't like organized religion and they were going to start their own church. And that she believed in baptism by immersion and wanted to know if she could use the pool for the baptism. And I said, ask your father. Anyway, he told them they could do it, and I don't know who got dunked because I couldn't watch. But if I had had Al-Anon, no way would I have allowed that. No way. So there's been a lot of growth with me, too. I can even see it, and I think we're the last ones to see any growth. I just am so grateful that Paul's an alcoholic so we can find this way of life. Thank you very much.
Let's get underway with welcoming Dr. Paul.
Thank you, Del. Good morning. My name is Paul, and I'm your basic generic alcoholic. And I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be here because here is here, and I like it here. And I'm glad to be here because of some of the people I love most dearly are here. And I'm glad to be here because it's the last time we'll be here before Max and I move away in the next 2 weeks, not to Seattle, but to Kirkland. Kirkland is near Seattle. And please don't bother to stop me after the meeting to tell me that it rains in Kirkland. We're going to go anyway. I've heard more about the rain in Kirkland than I need to know. I have made up my mind that I've had a lot of practice and experience in denial, and I'm just not going to see the rain. What rain? And I'm glad to be here. I'm particularly glad to be here to try to straighten out the stupid story that Max was telling. It's amazing how she can screw that up. It's good for me to hear that, though, in a sense. I have to try to get some good out of it. It's in a sense, it seems to me it's interesting. I'll talk to a couple, talk to one person, and then later on talk to the other. And then you would not know they were talking about the same situation unless you happen to know. It's amazing how one's perspective changes what one sees. And it's good for me to remember that when I find myself arguing with somebody or debating with somebody. It's interesting how wrong the other person can be and still be right from their perspective. And that's good for me. It's painful, but it's good for me to hear her say all that nonsense. And I'm not even going to try to straighten it out. She's a good. The truth is, to put it frankly, she drove me to drink for years. And, I said that I was an alcoholic, but I haven't always been an alcoholic. I wouldn't want you to think that. In fact, I haven't been an alcoholic since for only about the last 18 years. I became an alcoholic after coming to AA meetings for about 7 months. I picked it up at AA meeting. I wasn't an alcoholic before that. I found myself accidentally drunk a lot of times, but I wasn't one of those dumb alcoholics. And now that I'm an alcoholic, I don't even drink. And I've taken a few pills, but I never became a pillhead. Every pill I ever took was medically indicated at the time. I never took pills just regularly. I only took them as indicated, PRN. And I never ever took a pill except when I had the symptom that only that pill would relieve. I either had it or I could feel it coming on. So every pill I ever took was medically indicated at the time, taken according to directions and prescribed by a doctor, and dispensed by a pharmacist. I bought my pills by the thousand. And I've also taken a few narcotics, but I never became a dope fiend. Dope fiends, they'll take anything. They don't even know what they're taking. They say, well, what's that? Let me have some of that. I'll squirt it in, see what happens, you know. And they use dirty needles. They'll use the same needle over and over. God, crude. I never did anything like that. I never used anything but the purest of drugs that I had stolen from my patient, and I always used a clean needle, always. But I never stole any from a patient that needed it worse than I did. In fact, usually they didn't need it at all. There's people that buy drugs on the street. They've got it easy. It's very easy to find a connection. You just go out and you pay the money and you get the drugs. You don't know what you got, but you got the drugs. And with me, I knew what I had, but I had to go to a lot of trouble because I had to get it from the federal narcotics people. I had to buy them from a registered place and keep absolute records of everything I bought, every dose. Then they had to keep files in the office as to who got every dose of what, and what the date was, and what the diagnosis was that they got it for. And at any moment, a federal narcotic agent could walk in and compare your records with your inventory, and you had to be able to explain every dose of narcotic you had. And so what I would do is somebody would come in, maybe some woman would come in with the flu, and I'd tell Max, Max is keeping the records. She works in the office, and I tell Max, she's got cholelithiasis. I'm going to give her 2 cc's of Demerol. Cholelithiasis is gallstones. Sounds better if you say cholelithiasis, so you charge more. And so I'd say, she had cholelithiasis, 2 cc's of Demerol, and I'd give her 2 cc's of vitamin B complex. I'd take 1 cc of Demerol, and she'd owe me 1 cc. And sometimes I'd take it before a patient got there, and then they'd owe me, I'd owe them, and I got the... how those records ever came out straight, I don't know, but the point was I had to keep Max confused so she could keep the record straight, too. I said I was an alcoholic, and truth is I don't even know what an alcoholic is, which doesn't really matter as long as I know that I is one, and know what I need to do to keep it in remission, and... I know that I react peculiarly to the drug alcohol. I do weird and peculiar things when I drink it. I can't drink socially, sanely, safely, sensibly. I can't drink worth a damn, as a matter of fact. As a matter of fact, if the things that happened to me when I drank happened to you when you drank, you'd probably decide, well, I'm just not going to drink it. And you really, if the things that happened to you that happened to me, my dear, you really don't have to be all that smart to figure out, well, just don't drink it. Just don't drink it, for God's sake. You know, you don't have to be very bright to figure that out. I figured that out lots of times. Just don't react to it. Well, just don't drink this stuff. I have a body that doesn't handle alcohol well, so just don't drink it. No problem. Except I have a brain that insists on drinking. So I have to drink. And I both have to drink and I can't drink. And when you have to drink and you can't drink, that's a dilemma. What that means is that without AA, you're screwed. I was in a dilemma for a long time and didn't even know what the problem was. People used to talk about how they would feel wonderful when they drank. I hear it a lot around AA. People say, I took a drink and went and it hit the bottom and boom. And wonderful. 8 feet tall, good looking, dancing, all this. I didn't have that feeling of wonderfulness when I drank. I didn't drink to feel wonderful. Mine was more like, I've heard Father Terry say, when he drank, he didn't feel wonderful. He said he felt more like he was going to feel wonderful in about 15 minutes. Yeah. Mine was more that feeling. This drink isn't going to do it, but one more drink will. Yeah. Then I'll feel wonderful. It was always one more drink. And I didn't drink for a purpose. The only thing I know is every drink I ever took seemed like a good idea at the time. Never took a drink that didn't seem like a good idea at the time. When I think way back to the beginning, I remember drinking to go to church dinner dances. And I've always hated church dinner dances. In the first place, there's a lot of people at the dinner thing, and they expect you to talk a lot. They expect you to talk to people. I don't know how to talk to people. And you said, what are you standing up there talking for? I said, well, the only thing I know is maybe the pep pills haven't worn out yet, and they used to keep me talking. But I couldn't dance, and I still can't dance. I found I would have a few drinks, and I'd go to a dinner dance, and I could talk to people, and I could dance. And today I don't drink and I don't dance. And it seems, and again, I wasn't aware of it at the time, but in thinking back of it, it seems like the two, getting relaxed mentally and getting relaxed physically, the two got out of sync. In that I can recall times when I would get too relaxed physically and hadn't begun to relax mentally yet. And might affect my tongue too much. My voice, I'd have to talk real slowly and carefully so nobody would notice. Or I would reach for something and knock it down, or I would trip when I would find myself lying there on the floor. My head would say, get up, you fool, these people will think you're drunk. And my body would say, how am I going to get up? I'm paralyzed, I never have figured out how you get up when you're paralyzed from the ears down. And many a night I would find myself it was dark, and I was face down on a usually carpeted surface, and paralyzed and very confused and lost, and aware of only one thing, that I had a very full bladder, one that refused to remain full, and not knowing where the bathroom was and too proud to ask. And I'd lay there and I'd think, isn't that strange that alcohol affects me this way? My body must be kind of allergic to that stuff or something. I'll have to check up on. Being a scientific bent, I was curious about things like that. Didn't help me get sober, but it gave me something to think about while I was laying there. And then there were other times that the opposite happened. I wouldn't have even begun to relax physically yet, and I would get too relaxed mentally. It's like as if all my brain cells got together and said, oh, hell, he's drinking anyhow. Let's take the night off. And they'd go on home, and my body would go on doing things. And in the morning, I'd try to figure out what my body had been doing when nobody stayed on duty in my brain to make I never have been able to figure out what I did during those episodes when my brain was not functioning. I used to try to think about it. Used to try to figure it out. So I was talking to a fellow named Cliff R. from Oceanside one time, and he said he used to try to figure out what he did in blackouts, and one night he finally had the realization that he never ever had come out of a blackout to find that he had spent the night helping the little sisters of the poor. And So I no longer try to figure out what I did. And I don't know how to recall something that wasn't recorded at the time that it happened anyhow. So I gave up on that. And I ended up, as Max says, I ended up in the nut ward of the hospital I was on the staff of with this marital problem. And feeling vaguely heroic that I wasn't saying about anything about the fact that they had obviously locked the wrong one of us up. Spending my time in the nut ward making lists and orders and directions of things for Max to do to keep the world running while I was locked up in the nut ward, which I admit is kind of crazy. But as she says, not as crazy as her coming back every day for a new list like she'd been. The funny part of it was that, you see, Max thought I was her problem and was working on it. And I thought Max was my problem and I was working on it. I didn't just take one course in hypnosis to help her. Turned out, like she said, she wasn't a very good hypnotic subject. And I took six courses in hypnosis. I ended up a drunken hypnotist. There was a time when she was going to one of these psychiatrists. Our two adopted daughters were going to clinical psychologists. That all seemed rather hep and modern for a prominent, successful internist has his family getting psychotherapy. Of course, he doesn't need it, but they all do. I didn't mind that. But it did bother me that she would be bringing the dog home with psychological treatments. That I didn't like, the idea of having a neurotic dog. And I remember one day screaming at her, "What do you mean the dog just needs more love?" I said, "You go back and tell that idiot cat and dog doctor he's no Beverly Hills psychiatrist. All I want to know is, why does the dog wet in my lap when I'm holding it?" Strangely enough, the dog hasn't wet my pants since I joined AA, and neither have I. And speaking of dogs, I remember a dog named Corky, going way back, a long time. I had a little bitty dog, and she liked beer. We used to drink beer out of those tall bottles, Remember when beer came in tall bottles? And she loved beer. She used to sit up and say, "Hurry up, drink it, drink it, drink it." So I'd leave a little bit in the bottom of the bottle, and I would pour it for her as she was sitting up, licking the beer, and I would pour it for her. And the trick was for her to lick fast enough that she didn't spill any on the carpet. If she did, I'd scold her, and she'd have to get down, get up, lick it up, and I'd pour it as fast as I could, and she'd drink it, and give her the bottle. She'd lay down, and she'd hold it with her two front paws and see how far she could stick her tongue down in the bottle to get the rest of the beer. She gets through, she'd sit up, give me another beer, let's drink faster, drink up, and loved to drink. And of course the tick was to get her as much beer as I could and get her tipsy, and in the morning she'd be a bit hungover and all that. I had a drinking dog, and we used to enjoy. I had a drinking partner. One day she had pups. I don't know if that had something to do with it, or somebody talked to her about the fetal alcohol syndrome or what. But one day she knocked it off, just like that. Quit. Never touched another drop. Just like that. Just quit cold turkey. I learned to hate that damn dog. Never did figure out how she did that, but looked easy even. Anyhow, my problem was all my life I've known if you have a problem, you ought to work on it. And I had a marital problem, and I worked on it. As I said, I sent Max to the psychiatrist, I sent the kids to clinical psychologist. I did all these things to try and straighten that woman out, and the harder I worked on her case, the worse she got. And the worse she got, the harder I worked on it. I also had, she mentioned, a sleeping problem. I had a tremendous sleeping problem. I may not be the world's worst alcoholic, but again, I might be, but I have to be careful where I say that. I don't want to get in an argument, but I have the world's worst case of insomnia. I have congenital insomnia, and it's the worst case I have I ever know, and I'll be glad to compare notes with anybody here. And I found only one thing that would work. Sleeping pills didn't work till the next day. And I found out when I was in pharmacy school, I'd go to school all day, work in a family drugstore at night, close the drugstore about 11 o'clock, go to bed, go in and study till midnight, 1, 2 o'clock, go to bed, be lying there half awake and half asleep, and everything I said would be run through my head. And in the morning, I'd be both tired and stupid. And I found out at the end of the study period, I could drink a couple beers, jump in bed, sleep real fast, and wake up smart. With that first beer, to solve a sleeping problem, and sleeping is a living problem, with that first beer to get to sleep at night, I entered the world of better living through chemistry. And from that, for the rest of my life, up until 18 years ago, I was searching for chemical answers to life's problems. And I always found them. Everything I found worked. Everything I found worked. Except that over any period of time, it worked for a shorter and shorter period of time, so it had to be repeated, or it lost its potency, so I had to take more and more of it to do it. And it also caused a side effect, which meant I had to take some other drug to counteract the side effect. So with the first beer, I entered this thing that required more and more chemical and more varieties of chemicals at increasingly more frequent intervals. And working on a sleeping problem, by working on it, I made it worse. I thought I was solving it, and I was always making it worse. Did the same thing with the marriage, the same thing with my drinking problem. I do it with all the problems. Working on my problems seems to make them better, but makes them worse. The epitome, the other end of that, having a beer to get sleep at night, I got to the point where I was injecting pentothal in my vein at night to get to sleep. It reached that point. Because the harder I worked to get to sleep at night, the more I had to take something in the morning to get up and get going. I would have to take something in the morning to get going, and then I would take more to keep going. Then I would have to take tranquilizers to take care of the overshoot from what I took to keep going. And then the evening came on, I thought, my God, you couldn't sleep before. How are you going to sleep now? You're taking all these pep pills. And I had to take sleeping pills, counteract pep pills, so the scotch could put me to sleep. And get in there, and I would decide to inject pentothal in the vein. You know what pentothal is? That's that anesthetic, and then they put the needle in your vein. They say count to 10. You say 1, and zing, you're asleep. I used to zing me to sleep with that. But I couldn't go down. I couldn't go down to the office and put myself to sleep and then drive home and go to bed. And I couldn't lie there in bed and have one daughter call the other daughter and say, hey, come watch Daddy take his nightly fix. So I'd keep the pentothal in the bag and bang the car in the garage. The garage, thank God, it was attached to the house. And I'd go out in the garage and I'd mix up pentothal, stick needle in my vein, and I'd try to figure out, how many pills have I had, how much have I had to drink? I could squirt this in, take it out, take it out, throw it in the bag, throw it in the bank car, slam the car door, run down the hall, and jump in bed until I could fall asleep. It was a long way down there. And if I got just the least little bit too much, just the least little bit too much, it just zing right under the car. And if I got just the least little bit, not enough, I would squirt it in, turn it out, throw it in the back, throw it in the back car, slam the car door, run down the hall, and jump in bed. Nothing would happen. Half measures got me nowhere, and I had to do it just right. And the worst part was, as I say, the more I used it, the shorter and shorter period of time it worked. It was fast to sleep, it was fast to wake. And I would have to go back and repeat that. The epitome of using a chemical to solve a living problem got me to the point where one night I had to inject myself back to sleep 4 times in one night. 4 times in one night, make that trip, do all that. 4 times to get a night's sleep. And it wasn't really the most restful night's sleep I've ever had, as a matter of fact. And I got to thinking about it in the morning, about what I was doing. And I got to thinking that 4 times, I thought, that's not social sleeping. And yet I couldn't not do that, I couldn't stop doing it. And my ideas of work, Max had said something about, I was working on a problem, working on it, kept getting it worse. In the same way with the quitting drinking, I'd done all kinds of things to control the drinking. How we could deny that drinking was the problem and yet be working on it at the same time, I don't know. But a lot of stuff about my head I can't explain. But that's the way it was. And she talked about locking myself out of the bar. Giving her and that's right, give her the key so we could fight over it every night. And she'd hide it, and I'd find it. She'd hide it, and I'd find it. She'd find a better place to hide it, and I'd find it. She'd find a better place to hide it. I couldn't find it. I decided I would pick the lock. Have you ever seen a movie where anybody attempted to pick a lock and fail? It always works in the movies. You know. So I thought I could do that, and I got a bobby pin, and I bend it a little bit. I laid there on the floor, because the lock was about that far from the floor. I lay there, and I'd pick and pick and pick and pick, and then I'd bend the bobby pin a little more, and I'd pick and pick and pick and pick. 25-cent lock. Pick, pick, pick. I couldn't. Finally, I think, whose goddamn bar is this anyway? And I ripped the lock off, you know, and I put it back on, take it off. I did all sorts of things to work on my drinking problem, and it just kept getting worse. And I ended up, as I say, in the nut ward of the hospital I was on the staff of, and wondering what a nice guy like me was doing in a place like that. What's a nice guy like me doing? See, when you're totally in charge of your life, when you are in total control of your life, then you get all the credit for anything that goes right, but you take all the blame for everything that goes wrong, unless you can find somebody to blame it on. And Max, being close to me, got most of it. And I was fighting for control of everything there. And the more my life fell apart, the more I tried to control everything and everybody. You'd have thought I knew what I was doing. But the worse it got, the harder I worked to control everything and everybody. I remember sitting there in the nut ward with thinking of the things that had gone wrong, the mistakes and the misunderstandings and the things that had gone wrong, that a nice guy like me ended up in a place like that. And this dumb psychiatrist walked up behind me and said, well, I'd like to talk to a man from AA. And I thought, God almighty, don't I have enough problems of my own without trying to help some drunk from AA? I don't even like alcoholics. They always want to be seen without an appointment. Don't keep an appointment when they have one. All they ever want's an emergency vitamin shot. They don't pay their bills anyhow. But I could tell by the look on his face that he thought it was a good idea. And it's a practical point. I know none of you have ever been in a nut ward. But if you, by mistake, you ever are, you'll find that happiness on a nut ward is having a happy psychiatrist. You'll do just about anything to make him happy. And I ended up saying yes, and Frank came and took me to some meetings, and I started taking Max too, and it was an adventure, a frightening thing, and but we started going to meetings. And as I say, it took 7 months of going to those meetings before I was able to allow myself to be an alcoholic so I could quit drinking. During that time, I gave up the narcotics. And there were several things that were said during that 7 months that I think were two things in particular. One was, I was making a list of things that the people in AA had done that I hadn't done, with the idea that if that list got long enough, it would somehow prove that they were alcoholic, but I wasn't. And I was making a list of reasons why I wasn't an alcoholic. And about that time, somebody said of themselves, they said, I'd rather be in AA by mistake than out there by mistake. And since that day, ever since that day, I've been really impressed with what happens to alcoholics that are out there by mistake. You know, the cost. Dale talks about the cost of alcoholism, but the cost of being a practicing alcoholic and not finding the answer, the price we appear to be willing to pay to go on drinking. Appear, I say appear to be. We even say we're doing it, exercising our own willpower and so on, but we're not. It's part of the disease to have to do that. But we appear to be willing to pay any price. Lost a wife and kids? Well, didn't like them much anyway. Give me another drink, you know. We appear to be willing to pay any price to go on drinking. And what does it cost to be in AA? You know? Another thing was said, and I think it was probably important that it was said right about the same time. A man stood at an AA podium and said of himself, he said, I was judging me by my intentions, and the world was judging me by my actions. I wished he hadn't said that. Yeah. In all humility, I will tell you that I am one of the best intentioned people you've ever met. I'll match my intentions with anybody here. I have tremendously good intentions for me and my family and for everybody. But when he said that and I had to set all that aside and just look at my action, I was a drunken father, a drunken neighbor, a drunken citizen, drunken husband, a drunken doctor, for God's sake. Drunken doctor. Never intended to do that. And so after 7 months, I was willing to accept the fact that somehow I had gotten somebody else's disease by mistake, that I was an alcoholic. I accepted my alcohol. At that point, I accepted my alcoholism, which was the second stage. The first stage was to admit it. Max said she didn't see me hold up my hand as a newcomer, but I had, because I remembered that I'd hold up my hand. I said, "My name's Paul, and I'm an alcoholic." He said, "Oh, there's Paul." Everybody was happy that I said I was an alcoholic. God, I would have said I was a chimpanzee if it would make you happy. Whatever it takes to make you happy, but that was a step. I was willing to at least get familiar with the word and the label, and I admitted that I was an alcoholic. And after these other episodes, toward the middle of July of '67, I was able to accept the fact that I, of all people, had somehow turned out to be an alcoholic, and it's okay. I'm an alcoholic, and it's okay. Now, what am I going to do about it? And at that point, as I see it today, at that point, I stepped over the line and went from living in the problem to living in the answer. And I've never gone back. I've stayed in the answer since. And emotionally, I was miserable the first year, a little better the second year, a little better the third year, and it's got progressively better for 8 years, then some dips, and then better and better again. The ups and downs have been emotional, but I've had no problems with sobriety since that time, which amazes me. It really amazes me how easy I find it to just not drink or use chemicals today. I find not using drugs, alcohol or drugs, is just the easiest thing in the world. Living the program, it can be a real drag at times. But if I'm living the program, I don't have any trouble staying away from chemicals. I find that part very easy. And it's the things that I do. I guess what I've done today now is that I admitted my alcoholism, then I accepted my alcoholism. Today, as Max said, we approve of my alcoholism. I approve of the fact that I'm an alcoholic. I'm very comfortable with it. It's no problem to me. And staying sober is no problem. I thoroughly enjoy being an alcoholic. I'm delighted that I'm an alcoholic, having found out what the problem is and found an answer to it. It was a high price to pay to get here. Wouldn't want to do it over again, but I'm glad to be here, and it's worth the price, worth what it cost me. So I'm delighted to be an alcoholic. And I have no problems with working on my not drinking. In fact, it's best if I don't work on any problem. In fact, I don't have... My problems today are all my thinking problems. I've never thought I had a problem and been wrong. If I think I got a problem, no matter what you think, I've got a problem. It amazed me to find out that I decide whether or not I have a problem. I also decide whether or not it's a big problem or a little problem. I didn't know that I'm the one that decides whether I have a problem and also the size of the problem. I determine that. And I have very few little problems because I have a very powerful mind. And I can take a problem and think about it and just put power right into that problem and just... I can take a non-problem. Well, that's no problem at all. Anybody can see that's no problem. Why would you think that's a problem? Well, it could be, though, if you think about it a minute. No, as a matter of fact, look at it now. It is kind of a problem. In fact, it is. And, pretty soon I'm thinking, by God, it's a good thing I'm thinking about this. Everybody else is missing the fact. Now, look at this problem. And it keeps getting bigger and bigger, and I find out people don't even want to help you with it. They don't want to talk about it. And they say, well, don't think about it. You can look over there, and there it is, And you look over there, and there it is. But Karen, look at that god darn problem, And it's hard to get rid of a problem like that. I have this sponsor named Jack. Jack, he's a wonderful guy. But he has this real dumb expression. He says, well, whatever. Yeah. You're carrying around a problem like this, and he gives you that, well, whatever stuff. What are you going to do with that? When he's doing it, when his life's all falling apart, and he lost his job, and there's no chance of a new one, and everything's going bad, and his ex-wife wants more alimony, and he can say, well, whatever. I think, boy, isn't Jack working a tremendous program? But I don't want that, well, whatever stuff. In fact, my feeling, this good intentions business, I've always had the feeling that I could have done much more with my life if I'd had the right people behind me. If I'd had the right parents, or the right kids, or the right spouse, or gone to the right school, or been born in the right town, or if those things had all been right, I could have done more with my life. And I've always had this feeling that if you knew what I had to put up with living with Max, you'd understand why I haven't done more. Let me tell you what she did today. Let me tell you what it's like living with Max. And of course, my sponsor, I was always telling him, well, let me tell you what she's done lately. One day I called him up and I started telling him what Max has been doing, and he interrupted me. Right up, and I hardly got started, and he says, well, why don't you just put it out of your mind and not think about it for a couple of days? And I said, Jack, a couple of days, I'll forget all about it, You can't neglect problems. You've got to stay right in there with them. The problems take a lot of nurture and care. They're like a delicate plant, and they need to be really cared for and watered and fertilized, a lot of fertilizer, and you have to really stay right there with them. Sometimes, have you ever had a problem that's so great or so delicate, such a beautiful creation, that you can't leave it long enough to go off to a meeting some night? You just have to stay right there with it and keep it company. And you leave that thing, go off to a meeting, and go early and stay late. You get back, that thing's liable to be wilted down to the point where you can't even bring it back. You have to stick with your problem. But my thinking, have you ever, I'm sure you've all done that business of the 20 questions. I mean, maybe not all of you. The Al-Anons may not have. In fact, I want to mention that Al-Anon program that Max was talking about. If any of you are here that have a drinking problem and they're not ready for AA, you might look into Al-Anon. They have our entire program, and they drink too. And they don't have drinking problems, but they might have a thinking problem. And the 20 questions say if you get 2 or 3 yeses, then you're definitely fit for the program. And I like to substitute the word thinking for drinking. And you get questions like, do you lose time from work due to your thinking? Or real dumb ones like, is your thinking making your home life unhappy? Have you ever felt remorse after thinking? Have you gotten into financial difficulty as a result of thinking? Has your ambition decreased since thinking? Do you crave a think at a definite time daily? Do you want to think the next morning? Here's a real dumb one. Does thinking cause you to have difficulty in sleeping? Many a time my body wants to go to bed and my brain says, no, let's lay here and talk about it a while. Even now, in the middle of the night, it'll wake me up and say, hey, wake up, I want to talk to you a while. Do you know that thing you handled today and you thought it went so well? It wasn't like that at all. They're really ticked off at you. Wait till morning. Do you think to escape from worries or trouble? Do you think alone? And you can all answer this, yes, but I can. The one that says, has your physician ever treated you, or have you ever been in a hospital or institution on account of your thinking? But the one I like best is the one that says, have you ever had a complete loss of memory as a result of thinking? So I don't have a drinking problem per se, but I sure have a lot of thinking problems today. And I finally figured out why that is. I shouldn't have said my name is Paul and I'm an alcoholic. I should have said my name is Paul and we are alcoholic. And I found out that I'm not alone up here. I got a whole lot of people that live in my head. It's a very busy place. My life's been run by a committee. And nobody ever told me I was supposed to be in charge. And we just kind of did whatever the person with the loudest voice suggested. And one of them says, I'm going to have a drink, and we all went out and got drunk. And now when he says that, we say, well, you're going to have to go alone. And he finds he can't get there without me, so he doesn't go. And so we don't have that drinking problem. They talk about schizophrenics. That's where you take one personality, a split personality. You take one, you split it in two. You got two personalities. God, two I could have handled with no trouble at all. I got a couple of dozen. I've got personalities I haven't even met yet. And there's some up there that there's one up there that doesn't like Max. That's always saying, look what she did now. Does she realize who she's talking to? Yeah. Does she know who you are? Yeah. Are you going to let her act like that? But I've also found out there's one up there that thinks she's absolutely fantastic. Just thinks she's terrific. Yeah. Thinks she's beautiful, charming, witty, and just the greatest thing to have around, you know. I get tremendous contrasts in the people that are up there. And I didn't know that I can pick and choose who I was going to listen to. In fact, the ones that I didn't like made so much noise, and I didn't know the others were there, and I apparently used chemicals to drown them all out, to shut them up. It seems like that's the only way I could get them to get to sleep at night. Is that I was ready to go to bed, but they weren't. And I used enough chemicals to get them drowned out so I could sleep. And I spent my life trying to drown out the voices in my head so I could somehow get by. And I can't do that anymore. I can't. Reality is something I have to live with as it is. I can't change my perceptions of it with chemicals. I can't change reality, so I've had to learn to accept reality and live with it and pick the personalities in my head that accept things like this. And as I said, I wasn't aware that I had that choice before. One of the main reasons I can't turn off all the voices in my head is the same reason I can't ever quit coming to meetings, AA meetings, and Al-Anon meetings for Max, and I go to those too. We go to and that's because that's where God talks to me. God talks to me through the voices in my head and the voices in the meetings. And I have to stay alert. I can't use a pill or a drug or a chemical and then still try to distinguish when it's God speaking and when it's God knows what. But God speaks to me through people. I haven't talked to burning bush in a long time. He talks to me through people, and he talks to me through the people in my head. And I have to stay away from drugs in order to listen, to hear. And that's kind of a fun thing to be aware of that. I learned a lot about love on the program. I used to even hate to use the word because it seemed too strong, too icky, to be a loving person in that. And yet, I've watched in the program, I've watched people, how they treat newcomers. And expect absolutely nothing from them. Ask for nothing, expect nothing, and just love them for the fact they're there. Just the fact they're there, say they have a problem, it's an opportunity to give, and give for free and for fun, expect nothing in return. Ask for nothing. I've never heard anybody bargain with a newcomer and say, well, yeah, I'll come and take you to a meeting if you promise to quit drinking. Or I'll take you to 3 meetings if you promise to not drink anymore after that, or whatever. No bargaining, we just do it. And it's very helpful to me to try to treat Max the way he sees definitions of love. I heard the other day that to love somebody is to make that person feel important. Well, that's not all that hard. You know, that could be a smile, or eye contact, or a phone call, or a note, or 1,000 things you can do just to make that person, just recognizing the person as being alive, is often making them feeling important, and that's love. I heard a thing at my home group now is the Pomona 6:45 a.m. daily attitude adjustment hour. And the other day, one of the gals named Beverly was saying that she had asked her sponsor about this idea of being loving. She says, I don't know how to be loving. She says, I'm always yelling at my kids, and she says, I'm always irritable, and she says, I don't know how to be loving. And Arlene said to her, don't try to be loving. Don't try to be loving. Just stop doing one thing that is unloving. And well, she could do that. And what would she do? And she remembered that she's always yelling at her kids, and one of the things that really makes her mad is when she has to go around the house picking up the newspapers that the kids threw all over the house. And she's always yelling at them. And she decided that from then on, she was not going to yell at the kids whenever she's picking up the newspapers. She could yell at them any other time, but she wasn't going to yell at them while she's going around picking up the newspapers. So she'd go around the house picking up newspapers, not yelling at the kids, but she yelled at them the rest of the time. Pretty soon she enjoyed picking up newspapers so much she started looking for other things she could do to not be yelling at the kids. And Arlene had suggested that she had done the same thing when ironing shirts for her husband. She used to learn to hate her husband when she was ironing shirts because she hated ironing shirts. And she learned to do it as an act of love. And soon she was doing it for other things. The point I wanted to make was, though, that a man said, he was talking about his father, and he said his father used to love little children, which is no big deal, but he said he showed his love for little children by being very tolerant of them. And then it occurred to me that being tolerant of another person is an act of love. And that may be very obvious to you, and it may be obvious to you. There's a line in the book, just a little short line, and it talks about the AA code. It's the only place I ever heard about the code in AA. But there's a line in the big book of AA that says, love and tolerance of others is our code. I used to quote that to people just as a trick as to what's the AA code, and they wouldn't know, and I'd say, love and tolerance of others is the code. But I never connected the fact that love and tolerance of others are the same thing. And so I find today that just being tolerant of another person is loving them. Being tolerant of each other in a marriage is an act of love. It occurred to me that this as I say, not taking a drink or a drug I find extremely easy. Staying emotionally comfortable under all circumstances I find difficult because I can't keep from thinking. I'm getting better at it. And staying comfortable in a marriage is something I have to work at all the time. I don't know if I guess Max didn't mention it, but it occurred to me the other day, at the end of this year, Max and I will have been married 45 years. And we will have been emotionally involved to varying degrees of intensity for over 60 years. Kids today don't have what it takes to do a thing like that. For one thing, to do that, you've got to be very, very old, and if nothing else. And it takes a lot of work work on the problem isn't good. A lot of acceptance. See, I've admitted the situation, and the more I can accept the situation with Max, the more comfortable I am, and the more that acceptance is tolerant. Did you know that acceptance was not tolerant or not approval? It's possible to accept something without approving of it. Approval comes later, if at all. But anyway, I want to sit down because I really enjoyed being here, and it's very meaningful that I would be here. And it's meaningful that we'd be here at the first part of a new awareness. I really appreciate that. And I know you're going to have many, many happy hours of this season of the thing, and a lot of happiness in this valley, in this area. And I think that's important. Somebody talked before the meeting, it was mentioned that I had one time talked about the question of who was the first alcoholic. And I think everybody right away, all the women immediately pick Adam. I have my own reasons why I think it was Eve. In fact, when you think about it a little bit, it's rather obvious. But be that as it may, I have a theory. We've been told, let me start with this. I find sobriety easy and staying sober easy, and it's my feeling that if I'm not enjoying my sobriety, I'm not doing it right. If I'm not enjoying life, I'm not doing it right. If I'm not enjoying my marriage, I'm not doing it right. I think it's very important that I enjoy life. I think life is to be enjoyed. It's my theory that that's why we're here. To love each other and to enjoy loving each other, to enjoy life. All my life I've been told that when we die we're going to get to the pearly gates and God's going to give us a pre-admission interview and He's going to say, have you been good? And I'm sure they wouldn't say that if it weren't true, but I've never met anybody that's been there and came back and said that's what happened. So I have a right to have my own theory. And I'm not sure that when we get there, if we have an interview with God, that He is going to ask, have you been good? In fact, according to the current theory, He already has a book full of black marks and He knows I haven't been good. My feeling is that He's going to be not so much interested in whether or not we've been good. I think He's going to say, you know, I worked like the devil. I worked very hard. I worked very hard trying to give you everything you need to be 100% happy. I've given everything you need to be 100% happy. Were you happy? And if you say, well, gee whiz, God, if you'd have told me, you know, He's going to say, never mind that. He says, you know, I've really given you, look at the beautiful area, the beautiful sunset, the beauties of nature, beautiful people. I've given you everything you need to be happy 100% of the time. Tell me the truth. Did you really enjoy it down there? Were you happy? And if you say, well, not really, God, He's probably going to say, well, you can get in that line over there because you can go to hell. So the moral of the story is life is to be enjoyed, and you better enjoy it whether you like it or not. Thank you very much.
Oh, what a wonderful day. What a great start. Let's, before we go any further, ask both Paul and Maxine to stand up. Let's give them a wonderful round. Thank you.
Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with, and it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.